Good day to you. I'm standing here in a yard, my yard, and behind me are the beginnings of East Stroudsburg University. Can you see the smokestack from facilities management? And beyond ESU, somewhere out there, is a place that many of you would have gone to if the pandemic wasn't here, and that would be the New Jersey Shore or New York City. And beyond New York City is the Atlantic Ocean. And beyond the Atlantic Ocean is Europe, eventually. And then there's the gateway to Asia. And then all around the world you can go if you let your mind expand to take in that geography. The world is a monstrous place. And that's what we're going to take on today, the monstrosity of the world, so to speak, in terms of its media holdings. We're going to start with an introduction to media by setting it in the context of the entire globe today. But before we get to that, let's handle some other things having to do with setting up the course, easing our way into the course, making sure that we're getting into a rhythm. That's what it's all about when you take an online course, is making sure that you have a rhythm, making sure you know what is due and when is due. So first of all, just a reminder, by 1 o'clock today, you are to have asked a question about the curriculum vitae that's posted on D2L. And now what I want you to do, after you've done that, by 1 o'clock tomorrow, which is to say Wednesday, is I want you to go review all the other questions that have been asked about the CV and my answers to them. That will help to bring us together as a class and help you also to see what students are interested in from their professors. Next up, you are by 1 o'clock today to have recorded your introduction video. Your introduction video, 2 minutes long, answering those questions on D2L. And now what I want everybody to do by 1 o'clock tomorrow, Wednesday, is to go and ask a question or make a comment of all of the other students who have posted their intro videos. And then after that, I'm going to have students go back and look at all the comments and the questions, but that's coming tomorrow. So all of this is designed to bring the class together. And then you have your first assignment that was due today, the RSC Post 1. You're going to have another RSC Post 2, that's due by tomorrow. Just as a reminder, the purpose of that assignment is to get you to compare at a micro level the media that are implied by or directly stated by the columns in that book. So don't get caught up in summarizing the columns. I'm really very happy if you want to talk about what the columns mean. That's not the essential purpose of this assignment. It's the essential purpose is to bring out the media from those columns, and that's what you're comparing. And you're comparing them according to two dimensions. One is going to be the form. The form is the look and the feel of those columns. How do they make the person, sorry, not the columns, the look and the feel of the media that are implied by or described by the columns? How do those media make a person or invite a person to feel? And how does the media look? What is the sort of visceral feel of the media? That's what we're looking at. Versus the content, that's the second dimension that you're taking on. And content has to do with the specific information that's carried by the media described in the column. So hopefully you're doing well with those. I'm going to be sending around an example of one or two excellent ones to help you along if you struggle with this assignment at all and see how other people have done it. All right, and then we're going to be taking on now another new assignment. It's going to be entered into the mix. It's going to be part of your daily routine in this class. It's called a country media response post. You're going to have your first one, your first country media response post that is due by tomorrow, by 1 o'clock. And so what that involves is each student in the class is going to post a sample of media content from the country that they're studying. Every student is signed up for a country, so now we're going to go through the course with each student pulling an example. It could be a TV show, it could be a web page, it could be a t-shirt. We're going to define media later on in this class today, so you see exactly what the possibilities are for you. And you're going to post that as a student, and the rest of the class is going to respond to that by applying the day's concepts and trying to figure out how the content that the student has posted is a result of what we're talking about on a particular day or reading about on a particular day. Now, as it happens, today we do not have a reading. We're going to start our first reading from the D2L postings that come from my book, Comparing Media from Around the World. We're going to start the first one tomorrow. But for today, you're going to be basing your application of concepts on the instructor video. So you may want to have things ready to take notes on this so that you can apply some of the concepts that I'm about to talk about. And the reason I don't have a reading for this is because I wanted to update some of the knowledge that would otherwise be out of date in the reading. So I'm just going straight with an oral presentation today. And you're going to use the concepts that I talk about to make your first country media response posts. Also, I want to let you know before I go into the lecture today, for those of you who are graduate students, I will be posting a separate video for you that will explain to you in more detail the assignment that you have due on Friday, which is your research article evaluation, your very first one this Friday. Okay, so that's what's in store. Let's head into the main subject for today, which is this gigantic, monstrous world that I called it. The world is so big, it's really impossible to conceptualize, right? I mean, there's 200 countries in the world, thereabouts, and I ask you right now, how many do you think that you're going to dance on by the time that you expire from this world? 1, 3, 5, 7? Now we're getting pretty high. A lot of people don't go much higher than that. 10, 20, 30? I consider myself to have been very fortunate to have traveled to a lot of countries. I don't do it expensively, by the way. I do it about as cheap as possible. And I live with the natives. When I go there, I go to the local bars. I take public transportation. So that's really freed up the possibilities for me to travel around the world. And I have only even gone to about 30 countries. My wife and daughter have been to Russia. They've been to, other countries that I haven't been to, Croatia. So the purpose of saying this is not to make you feel intimidated, not make you feel deprived, not to make you feel like you have not had the chance to do what others have had the chance to do. I myself didn't start traveling until I was 22, seriously, the age of 22. The purpose is to try and capture the scope of the world. It is enormous. It takes an airplane a full 2 days to fly all the way around the world. That's how big the world is. And so where we grow up has a big influence on our impact, has a big influence on assessing what the rest of the world is like, and particularly as we see the world through media. Population-wise, the world has almost 8 billion people. When I first wrote my book, Comparing Media from Around the World, it was at 6.4 billion. I updated that today at 7.8 billion people. The world continues to experience population growth. And there are 7,000 languages spoken across the world. 7,000 languages. Most people in the United States are going to grow up speaking one language with maybe a smattering of Spanish, unless you study French or German. And so most people are speaking English in the United States, and it's easy to conclude that the rest of the world is speaking English, but it's not. The most spoken language in the world is Chinese Mandarin, just based on sheer population, the number of people speaking. There's over 1 billion people in China, 1.3 billion, so there's more people speaking Chinese. And then secondly, the second most spoken language is Spanish, and that's primarily because of the Spanish colonial period, where Spain went all around the world, conquering countries, really cruelly. We have to mention that, I believe, including Mexico, a country that I go to quite often. But Spain has created a situation where the Spanish language is the second most spoken. English is the third most spoken language. However, it is spoken in more places than either Spanish or Chinese. So it seems like it's the most spoken language. It's spoken in more countries around the world. And again, similar to Spain, that's primarily because of Great Britain and its colonial empire and colonizing places as far away as Australia on one side of the globe, and then Jamaica all the way on the other side, and Canada, the United States, Singapore, lots of places the British Empire was in. At one point, it controlled 1/4 of the entire world, that tiny island of Britain. It ended up spreading the English language around the world. And we also have to mention that when we talk about places where English is spoken, we don't necessarily just mean geographical locations. We can also mean the internet. The internet is a place where English is spoken more than other languages. Approximately 1/3 of the content of the internet is in English. So English dominates in many ways that these other two languages, which are actually spoken by more than 2 people, do not. That's not to say that Spanish is not a rising language in our country. It certainly is, and you can see that in our range of Spanish language media that are increasing in our cable offerings, in our websites, in television broadcasts, in songs on the radio. We have more and more Spanish-speaking content that's coming at us. Now let's talk about media. Media is a central term in this course. It's called comparative media. And so we need to make sure that we know what we're talking about. We could define the term very narrowly and say, oh, it just refers to legacy media. That would be television and radio and newspapers and magazines and film, legacy media. But that term is really inadequate today because we are also speaking about what has largely become social media. We can include the internet as a separate entity there, saying it's another kind of media, but really that's how the internet is largely used today for socializing. So social media describes another kind of media. It refers to all those apps that people go on, including the rise of TikTok during the pandemic, which I was checking out for the first time today, mostly based on my students talking about it. And so media is a much broader term, but it's even broader than I just painted because it really refers to any technology that carries a message to a lot of people. That's really what media is and media are. I'll come to the difference in plural between plural and singular in a moment. So media is a term that can be used to describe t-shirts. Media is a term that can be used to describe billboards. Media is a term that can be used to describe the messages you get every time you go to an ATM machine. Media can be used to describe advertising. And that's the sense of media I want you to have for this class. I want you to have the really broad sense of media. It's any technology that is carrying a message to a lot of people. Now, I mentioned that term media is sometimes befuddling because some people don't know how to pronounce the plural of it. Well, they don't know what the plural is, rather. So the plural of media is not mediums, that's not it, or medias. The singular form is medium. A radio is a medium. But if you talk about radio and television, you have two different kinds of media, so media is the plural term. Another term that some people have a misconception about is the past tense of broadcast. The past tense of broadcast is not broadcasted. The past tense is broadcast. And that term is a farming term, by the way. It comes from spreading your seeds around, casting them in a broad way so that you have more of a chance of them germinating. It was a farming term borrowed by broadcasting. All right, now we're going to move through the idea that people experience the world through media. You know, one of the scariest things to people who go to Mexico for the first time is to see a bunch of police cars going up and down the street with their lights on in broad daylight. And it's like, what the hell is going on? This has to be a drug bust, right? That's what I've read all about. Or no, it has to be somebody's being beheaded, some kind of gang murder with all these police cars. So why is that? Well, in part, it's because in our country we have a cultural practice where the lights of police cars are only turned on when they're in pursuit. But also it's because of the way that police cars are portrayed in the endless number of television shows. We have a disproportionate number of television shows which involve the police. It's an exciting dimension to our culture. We like to see people in trouble. The whole concept of the show Cops is based on that premise, which is a long-running show now going back to the 1990s. And police vehicles are portrayed constantly with their lights on when somebody's in trouble. But in Mexico, that's entirely the opposite reason that police have their lights on. Police have their lights on because they want you to know where they are at all times. If you need a police officer and there's a car right around the corner and you don't know about it, that's not much help. If you have a situation where your car's been vandalized, for example, that's not much help. And so the Mexican approach is to have those cars to show you that the police presence is there and that you are safe. It's a complete paradigm twisting observation to make when you go to another country, and you see that because our perceptions of the rest of the world are so thoroughly shaped by the media that we access. For example, Cuba, bad or good? You're going to probably say bad. Iran, bad or good? Probably going to say bad. Communism, bad or good? Probably going to say bad. And yet, have you ever met a communist? Have you been to Cuba? Yeah, probably not. So where are you getting your information? From people you speak to, maybe from what you're learning on your own, Googling it at a very elementary level or studying it at a university level, and of course the media portraying countries and experiences all around. So people largely experience this world of 200 countries. They largely experience the rest of those countries through media because they don't get the chance to travel as much as they would like. And part of the difficulty for us as United States citizens is we only border two countries, Canada to the north and Mexico to the south. So we don't have the opportunities like France does. If you grow up in France, you've got 11 or 12 countries surrounding you that you can get to within a couple hours. I mean, Luxembourg is a country that's so small you can stand on it and see all of the boundaries of that country. And so here in the United States, we have a vast space. And by the way, we're only the third biggest country in the world. Canada's the biggest, Canada's the biggest, followed by the Russia, and then we're coming in next, and then China's after us. So we're big, but we're not the biggest. And that bigness is also marked by having a geography where we don't have a lot of countries to interact with. So in the United States, we have a tendency even more so to see the world through media. And when we do get to travel, because of our culture, we're often convinced that the way to travel is through a cruise. We go on a cruise, it's a safe setting, we get off the boat, we go to a t-shirt shop, we eat some fried shrimp, and we have a couple margaritas and get back. Okay, I'm kind of ridiculing the idea in a way to make an important point, I hope, that that's not really interacting with another country. That's not really taking a chance and saying, I'm going to pick a place, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and I'm going to go there no matter how uncomfortable it is to me. That's a different kind of experience than the rest of the world. So in part because of our culture, in part because of our geographical limitations, we experience the world even more through media than people in other countries, some people in other countries. And when we look at media, we're looking at only one part of media. We're looking at the content of media. Most people, when they're watching a television show, when they're listening to a song on the radio, when they're reading a web page, they're not thinking about what's behind the content. They're not thinking about what led to that content being created. They're not thinking about how that content is being paid for and how that affects the shaping of that content. They're not looking at the regulations that exist in that country at the federal level or at the state level, which influence the content. They are not necessarily looking at cultural characteristics which give rise to the way that people behave and conduct their lives, which then also has to do with the way that people use media. And so content is the most obvious way to look at media, but it's only part of the story because content is a window on a media system. It's a window on a media system. If you go up to a window like in a mysterious house that looks abandoned, as I'm sure everybody in the class has done, and you peer into the window to see what signs you can see about some stories that went on in there, you can look around. That's what you're doing. That tiny space of the window is actually opening up a vast perspective beyond the window into the inside of the house. And that's the way that content operates for a media system. A media system is a complex system, and the content that comes out of it is only the result of the entire system. And in that system, you have globalization, which is the first element of a media system that we're going to be studying starting tomorrow. That's going to be our first reading. It's going to be globalization is what we're going to be taking on as an overall shroud, if you know that word, which is affecting the way that media across the world are operating. And then next up, we're going to be studying the cultural characteristics of a country. The cultural characteristics of a country are the ways that people live. And it has a lot to do with the societal characteristics, the composition of people ethnically, composition of people religiously or not religiously, the composition of the way that income is distributed across the population in the country. All of these have to do with cultural characteristics. That's the next element of a media system that we're going to study. And then after that comes philosophies of a media system. Out of the cultural characteristic grows the way that people think that media should operate. Media are not just set up to just run free and to go off as they see fit. Media are controlled, are regulated, or influenced because of certain philosophies that exist in a country about purposes that media should serve for the public. So that's up next. That's philosophies. And then after that, we're going to go to regulation. The regulation of media has to do with the way that media are controlled, not just in terms of being prevented from providing certain content, but also in the case, for example, of children's regulations, actually requiring television broadcasters to offer television terrestrial broadcasters, another term I want to make sure that you know. That's not cable or satellite broadcasters, that's over-the-air broadcasters. That's your networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, that's Fox, that's some of the big city TV stations that can reach people over the airways. Those broadcasters, they have a different kind of standard because they are free media, but those countries are opening up that broadcasting is a window that opens up a whole new kind of information collection that is in the public good. So that's a purpose that broadcasters are said to have to serve by virtue of being public broadcasters. They have to serve a greater public good. So looking at content is just a small window, but it's a very it's a potent window. It has a lot of rich information if you look behind it, and that's what we're going to be doing in this course. Now, I mentioned country quite a bit in this class. Country is another framing mechanism. I'm sorry, I need to go on and continue the elements. I got sidetracked there for a minute. So after regulation, then we're going to go on. We're going to study financing. And financing of media is an element that has to do with who pays for the media. Most of our media in this country are advertising supported, and it'd be easy to assume growing up in the United States that that's the way that other countries fund their media systems. Not the case. We're going to discuss it when we get to it. And you find out a lot about when you know who pays for the media, then you see the influence on the media content. Then after financing, we're going to head to accessibility. Accessibility has to do with how easy it is to get to the media. Do you have to pay for your media content, as in a subscription to a cable company or a satellite company? Or is it a one-off payment, like when you buy a magazine at an airport or in a grocery store? Or are media free? You make the basic purchase of a radio receiver, and as long as the battery is working on your car, you can get your media for free. Are media inaccessible because they have R-rated or X-rated content to certain people, and so there are certain steps you have to go through to take on those media? Are some media just unavailable in certain areas of the country? Is True TV, the television channel, is it available in Pennsylvania, but it's not available in Idaho? This has to do with the question of accessibility. How accessible is the media? That's another element that we'll be taking on. And from there, we're going to go on to discuss media content in and of itself. We'll spend a couple classes on media content as an element of the entire media system. It's the element that we notice the most. It's the element that's the window, but it's also an element in its own right, so we'll talk about content. Then after that, we're going to discuss as a separate element news reporting. News reporting has to do with a particular type of content that says what the well-being of society is like. It's like the way that people talk about each other. That's what news reporting is, only it's the way that society is talking about itself. So we'll be taking on news reporting. And then after that, we're going to take on imports and exports. Imports and exports had to do with what media content leaves your country and goes to other places around the world, and what content, like Money Heist, leaves other countries, like in this case Spain, and then makes it into your own country in the United States. And we're going to look at the balance between there for certain countries, and whether they're big importers and low exporters, or vice versa, or whether they're roughly balanced. They import a lot, but they also export a lot. We're going to take a look at that. And then our final element that we're going to take a look at in this class as we move through the readings is the audience, is the people who access and consume, if you want to use that term, media content, and what kind of people are brought up by the media that they're accessing by virtue of the media that they're accessing. Now, to return to that comment that I introduced prematurely before I continued on with the elements there, I want to go back and I want to say some words about country. I've been mentioning country quite a bit as a defining characteristic about how you will perceive the rest of the world, and also what media that you will have access to. Americans growing up in the United States are not going to have access to a lot of media from China or Russia, but you're going to have a lot of access to media that are entertainment-based, and a lot of media that are produced by television networks, a lot of media that are produced by Google and Facebook and the other so-called advertising agencies on the internet. That's all they really are, Facebook and Google. And so the country has a lot to do with the experience that you have with media. Many of you in this class said that you didn't have much experience with foreign media. Is that in itself not an astounding statement, given the fact that you're 18, 19, 20? Shouldn't you have seen a fair, healthy dose of foreign media just by being accidentally exposed to it? That's going to bring us back to the question of accessibility later on. But I want to go beyond country as well, because I want to say that country has less importance in defining what media you have access to today than ever before because of the internet. The internet is responsible for trends like avatars. Avatars are sweeping across people's Facebook right now. Everybody is creating their own avatar, jumping on. Before that, it was accepting the challenge of responding to somebody who's challenged you to post your 10 top albums without any comment and all these other rules. These are ruses, if you know that word, ruses that appear on Facebook and other social media platforms to get people to believe that they're invited to do something, and they are invited to do something, but it's invited to share information because they are prosumers. They are producing and they are consuming at the same time. And every single keystroke that you type on social media is being collected by the big data companies, the Facebooks and the Googles, and they're converting that into advertising dollars. So you're not just screwing around on the internet, you're prosuming every time that you're on there. And that is why you have avatars being spread, as well as all these other trends that exist, and something like TikTok is able to spread across countries so quickly today. So country has less importance. I wouldn't say that it's a diminished importance in terms of the fundamentals in the way that people grow up, because you are, in essence, national by virtue of growing up in the country that you grow up in. But the boundaries, the country boundaries, the media stop at the border with Canada. Still true for television, but not so true for the internet and all the other content that can spread around. Now let's take on the idea of comparing. Comparing is an important concept in this class. I mentioned it last class. What does comparing do for us as a method of study? It allows us, first of all, to establish a reference point, that we can see how our country is different from another country. We can see, for example, that we may be more obsessed with police officer crime shows than other countries if we take a look at another country's offerings in police shows. So we get a reference point. We learn whether we are more or less. Not to say better or worse. That's not what we're trying to do in this class. We're just trying to find out what the reference point is. And then secondly, the importance of comparing allows us to avoid cultural myopia. Cultural myopia is a term that I coined in my book. And myopia is an optometry term. It refers to short-sightedness. So cultural myopia is when you have a short-sighted view of another country because your only experiences of what you're looking at in the other country are through your own country's media system. So I gave the example already about the police in Mexico. That's a good example of cultural myopia, is assuming when you see all this police activity based on your own experience with American media that the police lights in Mexico mean that there's a problem, that somebody's in trouble, that there's gang activity. Another example is beer. It's often said by people who have never been to Britain, do you hear the English, they drink their beer warm? Well, that's not really true, if you want to be exact, if you want to be precise. When we see all the beer commercials that we see in the United States, so many of them are drenched with condensation and talk about an ice-cold beer. That is the way that beer is framed in our advertisements in the United States. But beer can be made according to a lager style, and beer can be made according to an ale style. When you make beer as a lager, it is best tasted at a cold temperature. But when you make an ale, it's best served at a room temperature, more specifically 58 degrees. So that's how English beer is served. It's shown in some, you might have seen some shot in a pub somewhere along the line in a movie. Beer's looking warm, but it's not, it's just warmer. It's an example of cultural myopia. It's judging beer, in this case warm, which is implied to be, ew, how can people drink warm? When it's an example of cultural myopia because you're judging it according to how you've seen beer portrayed in advertisements in the United States. So this then leaves us with the end of our second instructor video lecture for the class. I hope you have a great day.